Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Henry. You're watching Henry's Millions. Today is day 37. It's exciting. We're talking about forgiveness, concept of forgiveness and self-forgiveness. This is our journey, our path towards self-forgiveness. As you remember in the previous video about forgiveness, we covered Charles Griswold's work. It's a philosophical exploration of forgiveness. It's a great video if you haven't watched it, and I think it will help you build on what we're continuing to discuss today. How forgiveness was first in ancient times seen as a weakness, now it's a virtue. The essential role of remorse, feeling bad in real forgiveness, dangers of pseudo-forgiveness, how things can sometimes be excused, condoned, or rationalized. And when you're dealing with yourself, these are real problems, so we want to avoid those. And the risk of over-identifying with those that have wronged us, that's why there needs to be a detachment and sympathy at the same time, the balancing act, whether we're forgiving ourselves or forgiving others or others us. So that was day 36. Watch the video if you haven't seen it. Today, day 37, I wanted to cover something this gentleman wrote, Byron Williston, in The Importance of Self-Forgiveness. In lieu of covering that paper, I found an article by Madeline Monge, who covered the other paper in her article. Her article is titled The Paradox of Self-Forgiveness, 2023, in the Mackenzie Journal. She is from the University of California, Irvine. That was my backyard. So we're going to be discussing, we're going to be getting really into the thick of self-forgiveness by looking at the paradox that's inherent in this. And it's a very interesting way to look at this. So remember, forgiveness, it comes up when someone has committed an immoral act and feels significant shame toward themselves. So you want to get rid of these bad feelings. And in that, there, as Madeline explains, there is a cheap and significant shame. So shame is, there are different levels of shame, and shame is an incentive for moral development. So it has to be there, as you'll see. Shame has to be there as an incentive. So the paradox is that today, let's say you want to forgive yourself. So there has to be a psychologically continuum with yourself between the person you were, the day, the time that you committed the wrong act, hurt somebody, whatever it is, something you feel bad about, and the person you are today, looking up self-forgiveness, wanting to feel better. There has to be a psychological continuity, and they've talked about this for hundreds and hundreds of years. And even back when Locke, hundreds of years ago, discussed the continuity of the self, what makes a person the same and what makes them different over time. So if the person is the same over time, they haven't changed, then you can forgive yourself. What happens if you've changed a lot, where you've undergone what's being called a moral evolution? If you've changed so much, then how can you be saying that you've forgiven yourself? What is the self? How are we defining the self? Because if you've changed so much, that the person you were when you committed the wrong act is not the person you are today, so you can't forgive yourself. It's not yourself. That's the paradox here. And genuine forgiveness is only possible if resentment is released. Initially, there's resentment. Somebody, the victim towards the wrongdoer, or the shame, the guilt, the bad feelings you have within yourself. That has to be released for true forgiveness to happen. So there's the paradox here in forgiveness and self-forgiveness. And she discusses some other similar concepts, such as apologies and excuses. Very interesting. I bet you didn't. I think these things are going to be very interesting to you, because they were for me in terms of apologies. We apologize all the time, but that's very different. So, like, for example, there's a difference between forgiveness and making excuses. That's pretty easy to understand, maybe common sense. If somebody gives an excuse, they're trying to, or you give an excuse to someone for why you did something wrong, you're trying to be seen in a different light, to remove, get rid of that resentment, to block it, being seen in a different light. That's what excuses do. And forgiving someone doesn't mean that the immoral act is not wrong. It is wrong. What they've done is wrong. But when you forgive someone or forgive yourself, you are agreeing to move past the resentment so that you won't be weighed down any longer by the negative emotions. That much is easy to understand. So, but when an apology is offered, this is an interesting consideration here. You strip the victim their ability to freely offer forgiveness without being coaxed, pressured, or their arm twisted. That's very interesting. So it's like preemptive. It's a preemptive strike. You apologize to someone, you take away their ability to it's unstated, but like to forgive you, right? You're taking power of that situation. Very interesting. So, like, for example, in the previous video, I referred to the author of an article or piece of where she was critiquing Griswold's book, C. Lotte, and her name is Crystal Lotte. I hope I'm pronouncing this right, but I referred to her in the male gender pronoun throughout the video, and so I apologized. So in apologizing, as we see here, the victim is stripped of freely offering their forgiveness without any coaxing. It was a very sincere apology, but it can be seen as coaxing for forgiveness. Very interesting. But I think an apology is in order many times. And you'll see here why we apologize. It's in order. It needs to be done. So she says, apologies are considered a justification for one's actions. I don't know that I agree with that. Let's see if she says more about that. Well, she's talking about another author, explaining that there are two reasons. As the other author, Halleck, explains that there are two reasons for why someone would want to apologize. One is because they want to admit that they're feeling regretful or remorseful for their action. So I was feeling regretful for my action, and so I apologized. That is the reason. There's another reason for an apology. They're aware of the gravity of their wrongdoings, and they want to regain a sense of self-esteem that they may have lost. Not so in my case. I don't think my self-esteem was much affected, but a mistake was made. And so that's good to know, right? We apologize for one of two reasons. So we feel bad, or we want to regain a sense of self-esteem. And remember, the apology takes the victim's ability to freely forgive without coaxing. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, but it's interesting. It's like preemptive. So I wouldn't think you want to apologize for something big. It depends on the gravity, right? Little things, apology is easy. But big things, apology would not be accepted, right? So that coaxing doesn't work. The victim takes back their power to not forgive. Apologies are recognized as excuses under this theory that, this Halleck's theory, that apology is recognized as an excuse. I don't know. I don't see that as an excuse. But maybe if we look up the definition, true definition of simple words like excuse, maybe it could be seen that way. Oh, so here's why. So she, in her coverage of this other author's piece, he says, if someone was truly sorry for their moral error, they would not apologize, but they would stew in their remorse or regret. Let's think about that for a minute. If we were truly sorry about our moral wrongdoing or misgiving, we're truly sorry, we wouldn't apologize. They're saying, instead we would stew in the remorse or regret. We'd sulk. We would bathe in the remorse or regret. Just feel bad and not let the other person know that we're apologetic, not to admit. I don't know about that. I mean, oh well, maybe this will be cleared up at some point in the future. But it's interesting to see how others are thinking about this. So here we go. So she says that Halleck offers 3 methods where forgiveness may be a moral duty. So what that means is forgiveness sometimes is a moral duty, like we're obligated to, we have to forgive. Have to forgive him or have to forgive her. It's not just men that make mistakes. We have to forgive this person. But there's three cases, 3 methods where it should be done, they're saying, okay? So, number 1, we're talking about 3 methods and why forgiveness may be a moral duty. And then remember the paradox, solve the paradox. 3 methods. First one is the time factor. If resentment has been felt for a reasonable amount of time that equates with the gravity of the offense, then forgiveness may be morally appropriate. This is a very important point because in my future talk about self-forgiveness, this was already covered. Remember, I told you in the previous video that I already baked that talk. It's ready to be consumed. But I wanted to table that in order to discuss with you some of the thinking that's out there today. So sometimes we beat ourselves up for an inordinate amount of time where we feel like it's gone on for way too long. Sometimes we are torturing ourselves for years and years for something that's happened years before, where our wrongdoing, our mistakes affected people we care about, people we love, hurt us in the process. And we feel terrible about it. And we just continue to beat ourselves up internally. It's just an eternal hell inside of us. So this is one of the first of 3 methods where forgiveness may be a moral duty. It's an imperative, it should be done. Forgiveness should be had because you've been beating yourself up for a long time. So time factor. If resentment has been felt for a reasonable amount of time equaling the gravity of the offense, forgiveness may be appropriate. Number 1. Okay, number 2, if the wrongdoer has dissociated from their immoral act by some amnesia, not remembering, then forgiveness may be a moral obligation. So somebody wronged you, and later on, they don't remember it anymore. They have amnesia. Let's say they were drunk, or they really have amnesia or something. This is rare. This is rare. Then it might be required. Let's say someone in their old age doesn't remember something they did, how they cheated you 40 years back, like brothers or sisters, or I don't know, something silly or whatever. Maybe not, but 40 years ago, I don't remember that. So it's like forgiveness may be a moral obligation. How does that factor into self-forgiveness? Well, if you don't remember, there's nothing to forgive yourself about, right? So that's a good one for self-forgiveness. But in terms of interpersonal between others, so if somebody doesn't remember, you can't you can't hold them to account anymore. They just don't remember. That's a tricky one, because what if people pretend they have amnesia? They just don't remember. Like you hear this all the time in court. People are like, I don't recall. I don't recall. So the third method where forgiveness may be a moral duty is if, this is good, is if the wrongdoer has undergone what is called a moral evolution, where they've taken measurable, actionable steps to change, rectify their immoral behavior in the future, so they can be absolved of any guilty feelings. So this is called moral evolution, the change in their morality. So if they've changed so much, then forgiveness may be a moral obligation. I don't know how often this occurs and how often people change that much, where forgiveness is like an obligation. Like, they've changed so much. They're not the same person. They're so much better now. Oh my God, they're religious, or they're spiritual, or volunteering. I don't know. That's a tough one. People don't change that much usually. They really don't. Unless they've gone through a hell of pain, right? That should be a go-to phrase. Hell, I've been using that. If someone's gone through hell, like real hell, like if an objective third party looks at them and says, oh, I would hate to be in that guy's shoes, then there's an opportunity for change, right? Because pain and loss are the engines of change. Pain and loss. If someone is not experiencing real objective pain and loss, us humans, we have a tendency to make pain is subjective. Like smallest things, people would just blow it way out of proportion, and then you're sharing your pain and like, oh, let me tell you what happened to me. So pain is very subjective, but real pain and loss changes people. It's a very great opportunity for meaningful change. So if someone has changed so much, radical change, through pain and loss, then forgiveness may be an obligation. Great. So she gives a lot of treatment. This is Madeline Monge in her article, Paradox of Self-Forgiveness. So she gives some treatment about that. So we discussed this in the opening, right? Why is there a paradox? Somebody has to change enough for there to be a marked difference from the person that made the mistake to the person that feels horrible and wants forgiveness. But if there is that much change, then is it really the same self? And let's dive in a little bit more into this, because it's a fascinating discussion. It's a good point. Memory connections are a significant component to psychological continuity of a person over time. So if you don't remember your past, where's the continuity in yourself? between who you were 10, 20 years ago and who you are today. Memory is crucial. Memory is a crucial component. You have to remember. So that's number one. And we're talking about psychological continuity. Continuity of yourself, your enduring self, the same self over time. And so it's not just the psychological continuity over time. Not just the memory component to make you continuous psychologically, but there's also a moral component, right? Memory component, moral component. If there's something wrong with these two things, there is a problem with psychological continuity. Or if there's a significant improvement in morality, or if there's a diminished memory, right? So remember these two things. Memory, morality, make up the psychological continuity of the self. So we can tell, are you the same self or are you different? Everybody says they're different. It's just hilarious. Okay, bear with me here. So she says that if someone undergoes a radical moral evolution, since they committed a moral wrong, since you did something wrong, if you're morally very different today, then you can argue you're not the same person as who you were when you committed that act. If it's true, then self-forgiveness isn't really self-forgiveness. What is it? We have to make it. We have to bend it and twist it into self-forgiveness, and you'll see. So that's the paradox again. So when self-forgiveness takes place, it's obvious that you've taken steps to abandon the compromised morals. Of course, the morals, the thinking that allowed you to do a certain thing at a previous point in time, have to be abandoned for self-forgiveness to take place. It has to be abandoned in your work, the work that you do, working towards self-forgiveness. It's obvious. So self-forgiveness is a personal judgment, right? And it absolves you from experiencing any more moral shame. Remember that. You forgive yourself is a judgment. You are the judge, and you're absolving yourself from experiencing any more shame. Shame is a powerful emotion. So we are in self-forgiveness, you're redirecting these negative attitudes that you have for yourself in support of your moral evolution. Okay? Getting rid of these negative attitudes and absolving oneself of shame. And she gets this from Byron, or she references Byron Williston. That was the piece I was looking for earlier. He explains that self-forgiveness, this is quoting, involves a process of shaming whose ultimate goal is the restoration of the wrongdoer's goodness. This is Byron Williston. Self-forgiveness involves a process of shaming whose ultimate goal is the restoration of the wrongdoer's goodness. I don't like how that's referenced. I mean, process of shaming. It's fantastic. I'm not kind of criticizing, but it's probably the snippet that was taken. It sounds wrong taken out of maybe if we had the full sentence, but during this shaming, self-forgiveness, the ultimate goal of it is the restoration of the wrongdoer's goodness. Great. So he says that shame is the most accessible and painful emotion that can be a source of deep loathing. And someone feels they are morally hideous. When someone feels they are morally hideous, they might direct negative attitudes towards themselves because they believe it to be appropriate. I like that. It's important. When we talk about shame, sometimes we throw words around that are all too commonly used, but we're not feeling it. We're not really grasping this, having the understanding of it. Shame. It's like guilt, shame. I like that a little bit more explanation or description was given there. Shame is the most accessible and painful emotion that can be a source of deep self-loathing, self-hatred, and feeling they're morally hideous and directing negative attitudes toward themselves because they feel it's appropriate. Okay, that's good. I mean, shame isn't good, but it's good we hashed that out. So in order for forgiveness to be justified, there has to be a change in morals and morality. And they're calling it a moral evolution. And the word evolution gives it a little bit more weight. Like there really has to be a significant change. And in other words, an understanding of where they morally failed. So if you're seeking self-forgiveness, you have to have a really good understanding of where the failure occurred in your morals, in your thinking, your train of thought, in your values and beliefs. Yep, so she continues, understanding exactly how and why the wrong act occurred has to precede a moral education. So there has to be a moral education, formal knowledge of what moral actions are, and reducing the urge to commit them again in the future. A little bit more talk about shame. It prompts an individual to look inward and self-reflect. It's an incentive for you to work on yourself. I'm not suggesting you have any shame today, but we're talking. Incentive to work on oneself, even if only to avoid the social ramifications that shame produces. Yeah, in front of the people that know our wrongdoing. But she says that shame is not what brings about the moral change. It's the persistent effort, this moral self-education that is to be achieved, right? Persistent effort needs to be made. And when a person is morally evolved, then they can begin to forgive themselves. So it's a gradual process. It doesn't happen overnight. And if you're looking for videos on self-forgiveness, which I'm assuming that's how you found this, you've probably been torturing yourself or feeling bad for a long time. And it can be debilitating. It's really tough. It's tough to think about the pain that was caused, or the wrong act, the feeling of regret. And it's tough to think about how we are suffering and torturing ourselves. So we need to contemplate the wrongdoing and recognize the guilt or the shame that's associated with it. So a little bit more treatment on this moral evolution. So contemplation, thinking about it, recognizing it, these are first steps. Sincere reflection, we have to question our morals and values. And we don't want the self-forgiveness to be cheap. Of course it can't be cheap. For it to be enduring and meaningful to us, it has to be weighty, especially considering all the pain that we've been feeling. So it can't be cheap. We have to educate ourselves about the harm that we've inflicted on others and ourselves. And so I've thought about this. I've spent some time thinking about this. After you've been holding this, that you've been tormenting yourself or feeling bad for a very long period of time, you stop thinking about the facts and details surrounding this incident. And it just looks like a blob. It's just kind of becomes a symbol or a placeholder in your mind and your psyche, and it's just attached to so many bad feelings. But I think it's important to go back and take it apart again, go over the facts, remember everything that happened, and then think about using the person you are today, and your understanding today, and your morals and values today, Go over those facts again and the people involved, the third parties involved, and how were they affected, and why you did what you did. What was the thinking? What was the reasoning? You know, you got to make the case for yourself and think about the other people, because sometimes we do things because we feel like people deserve it, like they've done wrong, they deserve it. And then much later on, when more time has elapsed and we feel very differently, we can go back and think about, you know, how must they have been thinking? What is it like to be in their shoes? What are their considerations? Did they just do wrong? Was it only wrong that they've done? Have they done some good? So once we uncover more of the truth, that's a real wake-up call there. So moving on here, strengthening one's values, becoming more courageous, monitoring yourself. That's what you want to do moving forward in the future, right? So self-forgiveness has, she's saying, underlying factors, these psychological underpinnings. So the moral education, the moral evolution, what we just talked about in terms of strengthening values and courage and self-monitoring. I really like that she mentioned this weakness of the will. We've spent a lot of time in the past talking about will and willpower with the help of William James and the principles of psychology. If you haven't seen those, I think that the first ones are more like lectures. They're lengthy, but just really fascinating. That 125 years ago, someone did a deep dive into will and willpower. So she made one sentence about that here. I thought it was great. Taking steps to ensure a weakness of the will does not overcome a recovering agent. This is crucial for long-term growth. Moving on here, she discusses Locke, a philosopher, I think, from hundreds of years ago, how he's talking about consciousness moving forward through time, like how your consciousness at a past time versus a current time connects you, and that's how you are the same person through time. But I don't think I like this word consciousness used there. Because if you've done a lot of work with consciousness, your consciousness, it seems like it just does nothing but observe. If you strip everything away from yourself and you're left with consciousness, it's just observing. I spent a lot of time trying to do that. So you can say that the consciousness is the same. It is the same throughout your life. As far as we know, the observer is the same, observing you as you go through life. And yourself is changing, but is that a reasonable way to say that, you know, this self, the psychological self, is enduring? We're already talking about psychological consciousness is stripped of everything, so that's why I don't like that as being used to define some continuous self. Remember, we're talking about whether people should be forgiven or not forgiven, or you should forgive yourself or not, and the changes that you undergo over time. If you change so much, you become a different person. Then does it make sense to forgive yourself? You're not the same self. This is the whole thing of what we're talking about here. Bear with me here for a minute. Yep, so Locke, the philosopher, supported the view that personal identity consists of psychological continuity and connectedness, but it has to involve the psychological components. Remember, we talked about that briefly. So this is important here. So psychological continuity and connectedness, it's a theory that a person at two different times is the same person considered the same person if they share memories and mental states. Memories and mental states. We talked about that at the beginning, okay, just briefly. Memories and mental states. If the person over time has those, we can say they're psychologically continuous and connected. Interestingly, the memories do not need, they do need to be real. So I know, like, for example, in psychology, children or adults, when they're trying to remember their childhood, sometimes children can remember things that didn't even happen. That's a fact. Sometimes, I don't know, if you're interested, you go look into that. But so memories do need to be real. They can't be imagined, concocted, or so these are not the only two components that matter to someone's identity, this memory and this mental state. There's others, right? So values, persistence of values, beliefs, character traits, desires, moral sensitivities. These are great. These are great, 5 more. Values, beliefs, character traits, desires, moral sensitivities. They establish one's personal identity over time. And if any of them undergo a change after someone is morally educated, goes through a moral evolution, it's unclear if this individual, the changed individual, is the same as the one that committed the wrong. She discusses another article that said that there are 2 types of awareness of ourself, synchronic, diachronic. And so a thing that is aware of conscious feelings, perceptions, and thoughts. That's synchronic, aware of feelings, perceptions, and thoughts. Diachronic is the identity that persists through and over time. Okay? I don't know, maybe we'll figure out why we need to know that in the future. It's just interesting. The persistence of synchronic and diachronic. So, okay, synchronic, sorry here. This, the synchronic is desire, character traits and values. Diachronic is episodic memories. Okay, but they're both crucial to the self existing over time. Fantastic. Now it makes sense. Okay. All right. So remember, shame is a necessary precursor for forgiveness. Memory is necessary and sufficient condition for self-forgiveness. That's why it's good to go back and break it down. Remember the details, the facts. So you have to remember and you have to identify with that former self. It's very important to do that. So shame and memory are necessary and sufficient to solve this paradox. Moral shame leads to self-forgiveness. All right, how much more do we have here? Maybe a little bit more than I would have liked. So let me just skip through these here, see, maybe we don't need. So substantial moral restoration is possible when someone experiences an internal fracture where one side of the self is alienated and the other self is disgusted by the immoral action. I like that one. That she was quoting or referencing Millam. And Williston explains that internalizing a moral standard is imperative for moral repair. If you don't feel sincere shame for the infected moral values, then you're not capable of restoring moral merit. It's falsified shame, which remember is a necessary condition. So she talks about the cheap moral restoration versus the significant. This is an interesting point here to touch on as well. So rather than looking at the self as two different people, when some aspect has changed in the self, remember we said it was a number of things that make up the self. So rather than looking at the self as two different people, we can approach the self as a unified awareness. I like that word more than consciousness. It kind of incorporates consciousness, this unified awareness. And what's distinguished is the self is distinguished into three formulations, where memory is necessary for the capacities and values to be followed. The self as unified awareness, the self as self-concept, and the self as the seat of moral responsibility. Unified awareness, self-concept, seat of moral responsibility. Three different ways to look at this. So we talked about the importance of the memory connection, providing the sufficient relation to with the past immoral self and the present forgiving self. We talked about negative feelings like shame, psychological continuity and connectedness. All right, fantastic. So I think we're almost done with this. So what we're going to do, I think there may be one or two more pieces. There are, I think, two more pieces that I will be covering just because of their quality and the content that they offer us in our consideration moving forward to self-forgiveness. I wanted to be very thorough with this topic and in my treatment of it in a future video that hopefully millions of people on YouTube will find and watch. Thank you for joining me today, and stay tuned for the next installment. Please like and subscribe if you found this useful, and leave a comment if you have input that you'd like me to read or respond or react to. Thank you. Again.